Hi, Lois Weiss, New York Post. Leslie, I have a question about the, I guess, shutters or the outside grid that you ended up putting on the building in Portland, and how that added to your budget when you were suddenly faced with metal instead of, growing plants, and how you guys, handled that.
Anyway, so the budget wasn't changed. The project was still delivered on schedule, on budget. That's one of those things that we track pretty heavily. And I think that in the original concept, the expense of growing the vines up the west side would have been fairly expensive as well. So it was a trade-off, but still the project was delivered on schedule. The whole project was about $60 million. I couldn't tell you the cost of the reeds particularly. I could look that up and get it for you, but yeah.
So I have a question for both of you gentlemen. Spending tens of millions of dollars renovating these buildings, and much of the renovation is centered on infrastructure enhancements, mechanical systems, electrical systems, et cetera. In the aftermath of all those improvements, are there any active monitoring of the improvements to kind of prove out the efficiencies that were aimed? And if so, is that data available somehow to those of us that are interested?
It is. Actually, in the Recovery Act of 2009, we have $5.2 billion specifically out of recovery. So there's a whole program that's called G-Build, where we track the energy performance of the project. Because every project that we put in recovery, we said what the payback period was. It's tracked on the internet. You could go to the American Recovery thing and track the energy performance. They're tracked monthly, and they're performing the way that, for the most part, that we said they would.
And Michael, what about the UN? Do you have a monitoring program of any sort?
We do. The UN project, although the work is done on the renovation of the buildings, we have a temporary building that we're starting to demolish starting on December 1st. So until the temporary building comes down, because while it's there, of course, it's being very heavily used, so it's eating up air conditioning and heating and lighting. So our energy bill is not, we can't determine it yet until we finish demolishing the temporary swing space building, and then we will be have the numbers available for the public.
In particular for you, Les, when you're looking at renovating these buildings and you put up all the numbers, 50 million here, 80 million there, 180 million on some very large numbers, in making that assessment, that's, I'm assuming, just upgrading what's there. Is there any consideration of maybe a greater real estate proposition of adding to or expanding or somehow creating additional real estate value at those assets?
Sure. Actually, it's not just looking at what is the cost of renovation, because our portfolio department, we go through a whole list of, what is the net present value of the building? What's the 30-year cost of collecting rent? Is it going to be less expensive to move them to lease space? Where we can, we've done, like, we're just moving forward on a new court. Actually, we were going to do a new courthouse in Toledo. We've now redone that model that we're going to do an annex onto the existing building, and the cost of doing the renovation of the existing building, the annex, the 30-year net present value it's a better project than building a complete new project. And then we would have been left with the historic courthouse. There's not a lot of uses for historic courthouse. There's not a boutique hotel that's going to come in and move into an old courthouse. So it makes sense, and we go through that analysis on every project.
Fair enough.
Thank you. My name is Hiroatsu Fukuda from Japan. I was thinking that what kind of technology is introduced for UN building, because the UN building facing, the glass facade is facing on the south, west and east. So maybe the sunshine radiation is prevented of some technology. Could you explain what kind of technology, if you know?
Sure. If I understand the question, you want to know about the type of technology for the glass.
Yes, I guess it's the most important factor to reduce the energy consumption. If
Well, we reduced our energy consumption by improving our entire envelope and also by improving our chiller. Most of the energy is air conditioning, so lighting and the chiller plant help reduce energy consumption also. But the glass is actually a very, very high-tech element in the design. The glass is sustainable, it's double glazed. We did all kinds of experiments with triple glazed or double wall, and double glazed glass with the right glass and the right elements in the glass are very important. But the glass is also blast resistant, so it will allow the UN to sustain a relatively high level of blast and not lose very many people. So it's a complicated technology, but the glass does end up providing us with a tremendous savings of energy. Of course, most of the energy that we were losing was coming through the 1952 glass, which was eighth of an inch, lousy muttons and mullions, and all the framing around it was aluminum, and it wasn't isolated from the elements. So it was poor glass, and it's very improved.
Anthony, very, very inspirational. I think you're definitely leading the pack for all those to follow. And earlier I had asked the other gentleman whether the data that is kind of the building monitoring data on energy consumption, on all sorts of consumptives in the building, is that data available at that website, or is there another place we can go to get that?
When we get done with the independent third-party certification of our monitoring and verification process, it is posted on the website. So 2013 is there, 2012 is there, 2013 is there, and 2014 is concluded but needs to still be put up on the website. It will be shortly.
Excellent, thanks. How about the audience? Donna.
Hi, is this on? I'm Donna Robertson. I'm a professor of architecture at Illinois Institute of Technology in Chicago. Thank you very much. That was truly inspiring, all of them. And I have one short answer question and then perhaps one too long of an answer. Mr. Malkin, when you were doing the window replacement, did you do anything to the stone on the building? And second question, would anybody like to comment on what the design review process was like in terms of preservation of what I assume are both World Heritage Monuments?
We care about New York City Landmarks Commission, okay, which has a lot more power than the World Heritage Organization. So number one, we did nothing to the stone. We do our regular local law 11. The Empire State Building is interesting. It's actually a masonry building, and the limestone is actually curtain wall. It's not the exterior wall of the tenant space. It's the exterior wall of the building. And please keep in mind, we did not replace the windows. 4% of the windows were replaced. We rebuilt the windows. And then, it's really interesting. We developed a good relationship early on when you announce a $500 million retrofit program, which sounds like a big number, but it is a 2.95 million square foot building. Particularly one of the biggest landmarks, it is the biggest landmark in New York, you get a lot of attention. And we developed a partnership very early on with Landmarks and with the Department of Buildings. And what really happened was a tremendous motivation on their part and on ours to make something as an example of how things can work. Now, we respected Landmarks, and we got no escape or break from that, but we did get tremendous cooperation and speed and review.
Well, for us, I spoke to that a little bit. We go through Section 106, which it sounds like you would be familiar with, on each federal building. If it's under 50 years, so if a building's under 50 years, we would still go through a determination of eligibility to determine if it's going to be eligible when it is 50 years, and then we handle it completely differently than we would have Edith Greenway to Wyatt. As I said, the Kaczynski building in Chicago, we go through all the preservation issues on that building. The Celebrezzi building in Cleveland, it was going to be eligible for determination. That building, built in 1965, was in really bad condition, and we overclad it with a clear facade so that you can see the new facade behind it, and as mitigation did a film series on the project. So we kind of go through that on every building's a little different, and we address each one that as such.
The UN, of course, is unique in the world. We're not in the United States, so we're not subject to city or state or federal landmarking. We're also not subject to UNESCO landmarking because the General Assembly passed a resolution 30 years ago saying that UNESCO can't nominate UN properties for whatever reason. So the UN is not subject to any historic preservation landmarking restrictions. However, I'm the former chief historical architect for the National Park Service, and our team was very adept at historic preservation. I am very confident, and we did have several consultants who advised us on historic preservation, and we do meet the Secretary of Interior's standards of historic preservation voluntarily.
Mr. Malkin, I wonder if you could comment on the challenges that you encountered with rebuilding the windows on site and how replicable you think that is for anybody else who might be considering it.
Well, first of all, keep in mind we're double-hung windows. The windows that we reworked were actually about 20 years old. The original windows had been replaced, so that had already occurred. Number one. Number two, as they are double-hung windows, it's very different than dealing with curtain wall. Within our portfolio, I also redid a curtain wall building. We actually added a new curtain wall over the existing building and then ended up removing the windows from the old curtain wall, and the new windows were already there on the outside because of the new curtain wall we'd put in. Because we had the new windows, removing them was actually fairly easy. It was much easier than the original window replacement project. It was a logistical test to the building with all of the other things we had going on. Setting up the plant, the amazing thing about our plant is it looked very much like a curtain wall or a modern plate for windows, buildings, glass finishing factory. Glass comes out in big sheets from factories. The actual assembly of the final product that you use is, even in the big factories, really done by hand. So all we did was take the same techniques which are deployed in a factory, and we just built our own finishing floor, if you will. And it was a very effective assembly line. And we did, as I said, something around, the whole project took around 3 months, so you figure it out how many we did a night. Only taking them in and out at night, doing the work on the windows through the day. It was incredibly unobtrusive to our tenants. They would come in the next morning, and it was literally as though we had never been there. The difference, slight as it may be, is the only visible difference is on a very, very, very hazy kind of day. There's a very, very faint pinkish hue visible from the street in the windows of the Empire State Building, which is actually the reflection of the red window frames on the Mylar sheet that runs through. The other interesting thing, by the way, is these almost 20-year-old windows got another 20-year life. We got a new 20-year warranty on the remanufactured windows.
This may be a theoretical question, maybe for the Empire State and United Nations. You might have done a scenario where we demolish and reconstruct. And in one of the CTBUH conferences, somebody presented that the carbon footprint of a new building is for constructing new ones is about 5%. Then when you demolish, just transport costs for removing the demolished materials, another 5%. Then when you reconstruct a new one, another 5%. So would you be positioned to or to claim carbon credits of 15% for this exemplary renovation and retrofit you did? You must have done a scenario. Yeah.
So, it's interesting. The way that I got the legislation passed in Congress, which I did, the only piece of energy legislation passed by the House and Senate and signed into law in 12 years. 12 years since the last piece of energy policy legislation went through the U.S. Congress, was by making it acceptable to everyone. And the one thing I didn't do was ask for any federal funding, any tax credits, any tax deduction. I asked for nothing. It stands on its own 2 feet on an economic investment and return basis. I think the point that you're making is an obvious one, and why the work that we have done, I think, is so important. When you look at any mature city in the southern or northern hemispheres of the world, 90 to 95% of all the buildings that will be there in 2050 are there already. And to rebuild, to me, has 2 great tragedies. One, it is immensely wasteful. The most wasteful thing you can do is tear something down from an environmental perspective. Number 2, the Empire State Building is getting great rents at $70 a foot. However, brand new buildings are targeting up in the hundreds a square foot in New York City in order to make economic justification of their investment, unless they have some sort of tax or other benefit that can lower that somewhat. Sustainability should not be a rich person's benefit. Sustainability should not belong to the wealthy. If we want to make this work, and we want to make it broadly scalable, we have to make it approachable and accessible to everybody, which is why the retrofit work that we did on the building, and by the way, the tenant work shows the exact same thing. For the slightly additional cost, 3 to 5 years payback, 50 to 30% savings on electric consumption, 25 to 30% internal rates of return on the investment by the tenants, because they pay for the electric and they get the savings over the lives of their leases of 10 to 15 years. So I guess my comment to you would be, I agree with you wholeheartedly. Theoretically, one could and should, but I didn't think I'd get anything passed in Congress if I asked for it.
Thank you. Plus the tourists are cross-subsidizing the building, I think. The ones going to the viewing decks. Yeah, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Let me add, if I may, and I totally agree with what was said. Sustainability is an interesting word. Sustainability in the way the discussion is happening, both in this meeting and in the meetings this morning, is a financial word about whether your savings is worth your investment. Sustainability in terms of so much of the discussion in the UN is about whether the earth can sustain us, people, doing what we're doing. So it is a sustainable philosophy is aimed also not just at the bottom line, but it is also about whether the earth is going to continue to deteriorate. So that's, I do totally agree with what you're saying. Sustainability is very important. It's not law in most parts of the